everyone, my name is Sophia and today I'm here to talk about some tips on how to read big high fantasy books. So I have been reading big, chunky boys on the high fantasy genre for over 2 years now, and I kind of have gathered some tips that help me get through those quicker or without feeling so intimidated. So that's what I want to talk about with you today. First, I want to address something. If you don't read a lot of high fantasy, that's cool, that's your thing. But if you don't read a lot of high fantasy because 1, you're intimidated about the size of the books, 2, you think you're gonna have to be bored for a good part until you get to the good stuff, and 3, because you think it's not fun, I am going to try help you see the other side to that, which is fantasy books that are fun from the start, which are entertaining, which are just so good to read without feeling like a chore. And these tips are primarily for that, for you to get more acquainted with high fantasy, with how to read it, and how to have fun doing it. So my first tip is not really on how to read, but which books to pick, and it's not necessarily go for the most popular, but the one that's more right up your alley. So if you just read YA, go after somebody you know who can recommend you an adult book that's a good crossover. If you just read sci-fi, go after some books that are similar to that. And first of all is pick a book you think you're going to like, because how can you subject yourself to 600 plus pages if you don't really think you're gonna like the book after all? Second is read a lot of reviews to be sure that you're gonna get the good stuff in book 1. There are some series that people always say, oh, the first book is the worst. Get through the first book and then the series gets good. If you're intimidated, don't go for those types of series. The ones I've heard most are Malazan, Book of the Fallen, and The Wheel of Time. A lot of people like the first books in those series, but they do say, oh, the series gets so much better, the first book is the weakest. If you want to really get swept up in a book, don't go for those series first. Maybe pick a standalone, maybe pick a trilogy, but don't go for those. Third, if you're used to fast pace, don't go after 800 fantasy books that take 400 pages to get to the point, get the story going. Usually, you're going to have to give at least 50 pages, not to start enjoying the book, but to start understanding what's going on. You're dropped into a whole new world and the author doesn't hold your hand too much. So be aware that it's usually going to take 50 to 100, not for you to start liking the book, but for you to start understanding where you are, what's going on, who these people are. So be aware of that. Now my fourth and most useful tip, I think, is to break the book in chunks. Maybe the book is 600 pages and you don't have a deadline. I mean, you don't have to read it in a small amount of time. So you pick the 600 page book and you see, oh, I think I can read this in 7 days. So you pick 600 and divide it by 7. See how many pages you have to read in a day to finish the book. That is really useful because it's not like the entire book staring at you in the face and like, when are you gonna read me? Because it's huge and you're intimidated. So my biggest tip is break it up. Just give yourself a little bit of a goal, maybe 10 minutes per day reading the book, even if that's not a lot, because usually if you're not liking it in the first 50 pages, that's completely you can drop it. But be aware that most you're not going to. Some you're simply not going to because you don't really understand what's going on yet. My tip for that is to try to get through those first 100 pages quickly, meaning you pick up a book and you say, oh, I want to read this in 8 days. But instead of dividing it all by the same amount of time, try to read the first 100 pages in 3 days or 2. Just to get through them quickly, because you're going to get used more to the story. You're going to like it more after page 100, guarantee. Maybe not guarantee if the book is bad, but, well, another tip I've lost count, is to try to juggle the book, I don't know, intercalate, I don't know if that's a word in English, the book if you have it physically, try to get an ebook or an audiobook for you to just break it up a little bit, because I read big books quickly when I have an ebook or an audio. Sure, you're maybe not going to be able to fully understand a new fantasy world if you're an audio, because a lot of stuff does get lost, especially names and little things. For me at least, I do get lost a little bit in audio. For example, my reread of Words of Radiance, the second book in the Stormlight Archive, which is 1,100 pages, 1,100 pages, and I got through that in 3 days because it had the audio. I got through the first 3 books in the Stormlight Archive, which are 3 books over 1,000 pages in 15 days because it had the ebook. So I really got through them faster. So my tip is to not just stare at that huge book physically, try to get another format to really push you through it. Another tip I have is to talk to somebody who has already read and like the book you're reading or want to read. Because usually if you're gonna start, I'm gonna use the Stormlight Archive as an example. If you're gonna start The Way of Kings, which is 1,000 pages in the first book in a 10-book series, you're gonna be like, why am I reading this? It's so big, it's so intimidating, it's daunting. But you talk to a fan of the series, they're gonna show you their enthusiasm, they're gonna show you how fun and how good the series is. You can talk to me if you wanna read Way of Kings. This is my favorite series of all time, and that can really help you push through the book if you're not enjoying it in the beginning. Just really get your enthusiasm back up. Now, one thing I have to say, it's my tip. If you get to half of the book and you're really not liking it, drop it. Don't think it's a responsibility or you have to finish the book, because it's big and you don't have to spend your time with big books you don't like. Now, my other tip that ties in a little bit with the other things I've said is be okay with not understanding anything at first. A lot of people who read YA or contemporary or adult fiction, they can really get a grasp of who these people are, where they are in the first 10 pages of the book. In adult fantasy, that takes a little bit more time. Even if it's not necessarily boring or bad, it's just you're confused. Be okay with being confused. Know that in a little bit you're gonna understand what's going on, and you don't need to freak out or stop reading just because you're not understanding. It's normal to not understand a fantasy book in the beginning. Completely normal. The author doesn't even want you to fully understand it. They're gonna probably drop a concept on you, not explain it. That's part of it, because it has to build up the momentum to really share with you all the good and exciting and fun things that are gonna come later on. So yeah, these were my tips for reading big high fantasy books. I hope that these helped you in any way. I hope these weren't extremely generic. I actually tried. And yeah, my name is Sophia and I'll see you next time. Bye!